Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of remastering Avatar: The Last Airbender. For this video, I'm going to be tackling the wacky King Bumi as Aang picked the wrong opponent to fight in order to save Katara and Sokka from complete and utter devastation. Okay, that's a slight exaggeration as he's only protecting them from rock candy, but that's besides the point. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy. As you can see, this first clip out of about, I think 30, this is gonna be a long one, but this first scene is pretty basic. It's just a still image with the only moving piece being Bumi monologuing. The background is also quite easy, and once that was completed, I thought I would be done and I was ready to move on to the second clip. But the more I looked at it, the more empty this left side of the canvas felt. So to remedy the situation, I moved Aang onto a separate layer and increased his size while also changing his position. I then added some blur to give some depth, and let me know down below if you prefer this first attempt or this second one. Usually in one of my remastering Avatar videos, I tend to get a few warm-up scenes that are good practice layups before ultimately attempting a crazy panning 360 alley-oop dunk, kind of scene. But unfortunately for me, I was tasked with completing this sequence right off the bat. And honestly, it's not too bad in the grand scheme of things. It just has some slight zooming and a good amount of panning across the room to the balcony area, but overall it was a bit of a nuisance to accomplish. At least we get to see some vibrant colors coming from the rocks of Sokka and Katara. As I mentioned before, this entire sequence wasn't necessarily difficult. It was just extremely boring, tedious, repetitive, boring, monotonous, dull. Now I know I'm repeating my words, but that's pretty indicative of how it felt to work on this scene. But moving along, we have Aang catching his staff that is thrown by one of Bumi's soldiers. This clip was another easy one that barely required anything more than completing the background. I did have to work on the staff, but that was pretty much just a couple of straight lines and a color fill tool away from being marked complete. So far in this remaster series, I was able to work on airbending, waterbending, firebending, and Sokka bending, but I think this is the first time working on earthbending, so I was extremely excited until I realized that almost all of the earthbending sequences, at least for this battle, had the prerequisite of extreme shaking and camera tremors. Visually it looks great, but it's honestly a hassle to work through. Using the keyframe tool, I was able to match my work to the original background to the best of my ability before I continued onward. And all things considered, the earthbending in this scene is incredibly tame, as all I had to do was recreate this giant boulder. Well, okay, it's not just a boulder.
It's a rock! A rock!
Using the rock as a reference, I quickly filled in the remaining pieces and went on to the next scene. Aang must be in the Matrix because he's doing his best Neo impression as he effortlessly dodges these rocks that are hurling towards him. After working on the background, I had to get my best approximation of where I think the rocks should be placed on the sidelines. Now, I'm not a physics major, and frankly, I remember failing so many physics exams in college, but to my untrained eye, I think that the location of the rocks look fairly solid and believable. As annoying and dull as these backgrounds may be, they at least have the amazing benefit of being quite symmetrical with each other. This just lets me reuse the assets that are already on screen, and this process definitely speeds things up by a significant margin. Obviously, I can't just copy and paste and be done with it. I need to do some extra work to fully merge the two together, but once that was done, all that was left was to do some keyframing to match the shaking stemming from the extremely heavy foot of King Bumi. The outcome of that extremely heavy foot is Aang playing a game of reverse whack-a-mole as he's battling for his life here. The background, surprise surprise, needs more keyframing to match all the shaking going around, and that was all that was needed to be done for this one. Putting the attention back on Bumi, and he's still in the exact same position from before. That meant all I needed to do for this scene was copy and paste the work I did in prior canvas and slap it onto here, good as new. Because of the length of this battle between Aang and Bumi, I decided to jump ahead to a different section of the battle sequence. Although we're jumping around, I still tried my hardest to select scenes that would work well together and have a good flow. So in this scene, we have Aang activating his air scooter as he attempts to rush towards Bumi, while simultaneously dodging boulders emerging from the ground. And if you remember my previous Omashu video, you would know that I find moments like this super tedious and just straight up boring. This was no exception. The only saving grace is the fact that this one was actually pretty quick to work on, and it was nice seeing a dynamic movement from Aang. We're about a third of the way done with the clips I chose, so let's get a quick look at what's been completed so far. I wasn't entirely sure if I made the right choice choosing this whole sequence as the video, but after working on this initial, first third, I am enjoying how it's turning out, and I'm looking forward to seeing how much more I can do going forward. Using the wall as a platform to travel on, we have Aang using his air scooter to avoid the rocks emerging from the ground. I mainly had to work on this close-up of the wall along with completing this blurry ball of air as we transition onward. And just when I thought I was done with these blurry scenes, they pull me right back in. Unlike the prior one, which was really quick, this one for some reason took quite a while. That being said, it's nice seeing Aang finally go on the offensive and fire off a blast of air to his crazy opponent. But this blast of air might as well just be a cool light breeze on a warm summer day, because all Bumi felt was a slight draft. The background came easily enough, but the main challenge on this scene was dealing with the color change as the wind makes its way from Aang to Bumi. After trying and failing multiple times, I decided it might be best to just brush over the entire canvas instead of trying to meticulously match the sides with the original. This gives some consistency, although it's not the cleanest look. We're slowly but surely getting more into the thick of it with this fun angle of Bumi starting his earthbending stance. It was also fun working on earthbending that isn't just flying boulders. As always, the background was done easily using my airbrush tool and a mixture of colors. I then added Bumi's missing foot before getting to the earthbending. Stepping back a bit, and we get to focus more on the earth itself as it violently moves towards Aang. Obviously the background was done and I forgot to complete the recording of me working on the earth, so here's a quick look at what that looks like all done. The upcoming clip of Aang dodging these rocks seems simple enough at first. But you and I should know by now that simple rarely happens in these remaster videos. The second thing I did after, the background being the first, was to work on the ruptured earth at the last frame and work back from there. With each frame I had to match the shaking of the rocks as they slowly go away one by one till the rock I created was the only one left. I pretty much just did this in reverse order because I thought it would be easier to go from a fully constructed rock piece to one instead of the other way around. Aang supermans his way away from Bumi's attack and we get yet another blurred scene of Aang's quick feet desperately rushing to try another attack. It's just blurs for this one, so I'll just move on ahead because it's nothing we haven't seen before. Bumi does do a good job reacting to Aang's rush attack by creating a mudslide trap to trap Aang. This mainly consisted of more work on the background and more panning/zooming downwards. And speaking of panning shots, this next one is mainly just that. This one was fairly difficult to recreate because I had to make sure the image entering the widescreen portion had to be consistent, and that meant having to draw over Aang's staff and parts of the ground and the smoke constantly. Then once the keyframing was done, I had to draw on top of everything all over again to expand on the mudslide/smoke or dust that came from Bumi's attack. So now the second portion of the completed work is done, so let's showcase the second part now. This portion was definitely a lot more fun to work on because there's more action going on. It, however, was getting a bit frustrating having to work on the same environments over and over again, but what can you do? Now that Aang has Bumi in his clutches, all the way around. Now that Bumi has Aang in his clutches, it was time for Bumi to go on the offensive. We start by taking these two simple scenes of these rocks getting levitated gently before aggressively charging towards Aang. The next clip is more of the same but from the other rock's perspective. Aang is clearly struggling to move here, and despite all the movement happening in this scene, I didn't really need to do too much besides adding onto the background yet again. And I have to say that doing 20 clips prior, I was getting sick of doing the same background over and over and over again. But the more I thought about it, I vastly preferred doing this than working on the tedious line work from the Suki remaster video, or even the chaotic energy for the mail delivery system in the Omashu one. These two rocks come running towards each other like, I don't know, Perry the Platypus and Dr. Doofenshmirtz. Poor Aang is stuck between a rock and a hard place, quite literally. I guess my personal rock and hard place are all of these shaking shots that I need to do. On top of that, I had to work on the smoke that's left behind from the collision. It was a little bit frustrating, but at least it broke from the tedium of having to match my work to the shaking of the background. And just when we thought Aang was defeated, he rises again from the ashes and jumps towards the camera. I didn't really care too much about the background in this one since I knew that a good portion of it would be covered by the smoke, so after doing the keyframing, it was time to put my attention to that. The smoke was a bit more annoying than I expected, but nothing too hard in the grand scheme of things. After all was said and done, the final piece of this scene was working on Aang's staff as he gets closer and closer on the canvas. We're going to jump ahead even further, and I think this upcoming moment matches really well with the prior one, even though they're not connected. I mainly worked on getting this giant piece of smoke done as Aang makes his way towards Bumi. I primarily used my airbrush tool and the liquify tool as the dust settles. We're in the final stretch now, but in this clip I worked on completing the background, and luckily for me, Aang jumps in from the top of the canvas instead of the left. That means I didn't have to actually do any animating on Aang himself and focus just on the background, which was fine by me. Next, we have a reaction shot of Bumi, and this one was a nice change of pace. The main focus for me wasn't on the background, thank goodness, but instead on Bumi's arm and Aang's staff. It was nice to do some line work and not focus on keyframing anything as well. It was just a really nice change of pace. The second to last clip is another easy one. I finished working on the floor and Aang's staff, and that was it. I personally wasn't the biggest fan of how empty the scene did feel, but let me know down below if you would have preferred it if I moved Aang closer to the camera to remove the emptiness, or if I just left it as it is. And finally, and when I say finally, I mean finally, we've reached the last clip. This features a quick zoom out to show the giant rock Bumi had over his head, but instead of trying to work on each frame and keyframing it, I decided to work on the fully expanded picture first, and then utilize the camera layer to do the zooming for me, and that sped the process up so much. And finally, I was done. And here is the full collection of clips that I worked on. This was a long process, mainly due to the amount of clips I had to do. Not to mention I couldn't even do the entire sequence strictly from the length of it all. I still tried to make everything flow together and hide a lot of cuts that take place. It could have gone a lot longer, but luckily the clips that I had to do were on the shorter side, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I was super excited to work on this video in the very beginning, but that excitement quickly went away as I realized that most of the remaster or widescreen effort, from this video at least, consisted of just adding the same 4 things to the background and then just shaking them up a bit. There was a lot less variety than I expected, and it definitely was a bit of a bore to work on. Hopefully that isn't the case for this video, as I still worked pretty hard getting it done on time. I'm pretty pleased with the final result of all these clips, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I do have another video where I worked on mashing up characters from Avatar with characters from the MCU. I'm really proud of that one as I had a lot of fun making it, so please check it out if you haven't already. That being said, please leave a comment down below on what you thought of the video. Like if you haven't done so already. And also just subscribe if you want to stay tuned for more videos. But yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.